Welcome to AquarianRadio.com.
AquarianRadio.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Enki Speaks, an episode of Ancient Anthropology. And I'm your host, Janet Lesson. Together with my co-host, anthropologist Sasha Lesson, we present a series of internet radio programs on the civilizations of Inner Earth known as Agartha, and Agartha's impact on us surface dwellers. Today's program, Olaf Jansen's Adventure in Agartha, is part 2 in our series entitled Inner Earth Civilizations and Their Impact on Us. Our source from which we read excerpts is The Smoky God, A Voyage to the Inner Worlds by Willis George Emerson, published in 1908.
So, Olaf Jansen, on his deathbed in Los Angeles at age 95, gave the author Emerson his notes on the trip that Olaf and his dad had in Agartha. And here's what he said. I'm Norwegian. I was 19 when my father, Jens Jansen, and I started on what proved to be our last trip as fishermen, and which resulted in a strange story that shall be given to the world as I finish my earthly pilgrimage. I dare not let the facts, as I know, be published while I'm living, because I don't want any further humiliation, confinement, and suffering. I was put in irons by the captain of the whaling vessel that rescued me for telling about the discoveries made by my father and myself. Put in irons. After 4 years and 8 months' absence, I finally reached my home in Stockholm, only to find my mother had died the previous year. The property left by my parents that were now in the possession of my mother's people, and it was at once made, but it used to be made over to me. Well, I lost it all.
Olaf told his story to his rich uncle Gustav Osterland and urged him to find out if an expedition back to Agartha.
To fit out an expedition.
Fit out. Oh, sorry. There's me not reading right. Osterland brought Olaf before authorities, he thought, to outline the expedition he proposed. But Olaf said, upon the conclusion of my narrative, I found myself arrested and hurried away to dismal and fearful confinement in a madhouse, where I remained for 28 years. I never ceased to assert my sanity and to protest against the injustice of my confinement. Finally, on the 17th of October, 1862, I was released. I shipped with the fishermen on a long fishing cruise to the Lofoten Islands, and eventually bought a fishing brig of my own. For 27 years thereafter, I followed the sea as a fisherman, 5 years working for others, and the last 22 for myself. I took great care not to mention to anyone the story concerning the discoveries made by my father and myself. In 1889, I sold out my fishing boats and found I had accumulated a fortune quite sufficient to keep me the remainder of my life. I then came to America. When my days on earth are finished, I shall leave maps and records that will enlighten and, I hope, benefit mankind. The memory of my long confinement with maniacs and all the horrible anguish and sufferings are too vivid to warrant my taking further chances.
So here's what Olaf told Emerson. We left Stockholm in our fishing sloop on the 3rd day of April, 1829. We sailed around the Scandinavian coast. We went for the Lofoten Islands. Then we sailed through the Hinlopen Strait, coasted down the northeastland, and sailed along Franz Joseph Land to its west coast. In 24 hours, Dad and I came to a 1 or 2 acre warm and tranquil inlet. In front of us, the North Sea lay open. Father said that still farther north was land more beautiful than any that mortal man had ever seen. I said, well, Dad, why not sail to this goodly land? The sky is fair, the wind favorable, and the seas are open.
Jens, Olaf's father, said, "Son, are you willing to go with me beyond where man has ever ventured?" When Olaf said yes, they sailed due north for 36 hours till they lost sight of Franz Josef Land, but the sea felt warmer than Norway 6 weeks before. A storm hit them and drove them at a terrific speed. Olaf wrote, "Most of our provisions tumbled out and were swept away before the wind died down. Before us lay an iceless channel 10 or 15 miles wide, with few icebergs far away to our right, and an intermittent archipelago of smaller icebergs to the left. We found less than 1/3 of our provisions remaining. Our water casks had been swept overboard during the violent plungings of our boat." Now, Olaf said, the sun beat down slantingly, swinging around, its orbit ever visible and higher each day through the clouds. "I filled the vessel with seawater for washing. When the water came in contact with my lips, I could taste no salt. Fresh water is carried along with the ship on a heavier sea beneath it. We had drinking water on the surface. Water from the bottom of the engine room was too salty for the boiler." Their compass locked on its glass at hard north. "We loosened the compass," Olaf wrote, "and turned it at right angles with the surface of the sea before its point would free itself from the glass and point according to the attraction. It shifted unsteady, but finally pointed a course. Before this we thought the wind was carrying us north by northwest, but with the needle free we discovered we were sailing north by northeast, ever tending northward. The sea was smooth, the wind brisk, and the sun's rays, striking us aslant, warm. We sailed 11 days in the open sea. The water was now salty."
So Olaf's account continued. Father called my attention to the horizon. "It's a mock sun," he said. "It's that what you see up there is a reflection or a mirage. But this false sun," that's what we thought it was, "did not pass. It was still there. There was no time thereafter when we could not sweep the horizon in front and locate the illumination of this so-called false sun. 12 hours out of every 24, there was that false sun. Gradually, it seemed to climb higher. Hazy red and bronzed, it would change to white light like a luminous cloud reflecting greater light beyond. It was not a reflection of our sun. One day, Dad shook me from sleep. 'Olaf, wake up! Land's in sight!' We saw banks covered with trees and vegetation. Well, the compass still pointed due north and moved on its pivot the way it did in Stockholm. Dad said this is called the dipping of the needle, and that what was happening when it was going crazy now stopped, and it was really pointing north. At least that's what the needle said. But we thought we were going south. Anyway, we sailed 3 days along the shore. Then we came to the mouth of a river of immense size, like a great bay. Into this we turned our craft, slightly northeast of south. We continued inland to a mighty river, the Hiddekel. After 10 days, we attained a distance inland, where ocean tides no longer affected the water. This was now fresh water. So Olaf and Jens replenished their water casks, and they kept sailing further upriver. They saw huge trees in a forest that stretched miles as they sailed along. "We landed," wrote Olaf, "on a sandy beach, waded ashore, and we found nuts that were good to eat."
The notes Olaf gave Emerson continued. 5 months since the Jensens sailed from Stockholm, they heard harps and people singing, and saw, Olaf wrote, a huge ship gliding downriver towards us. The craft lowered a boat. 6 men of gigantic stature rowed to our sloop. They spoke a strange language. We knew from their manner they were friendly. The leader motioned to ask whether we'd leave our craft to board their ship. "We may as well go willingly as rather be taken by force," said my father. Within a few minutes we were on board the ship. Half an hour later our craft had been lifted by hook and tackle and set on board. There were several hundred people on board this mammoth ship, which we discovered was called Naz, which means pleasure excursion. All the men on board stood over 12 feet tall. They all wore full beards and had beautiful faces, fair with ruddy complexions. The hair and beard were of some were black, others sandy, others yellow. The captain was fully a head taller than any of his companions. The women averaged from 10 to 11 feet in height. Their features were especially regular and refined, while their complexion was of the most delicate tint, heightened by a healthy glow. Both men and women seemed to possess ease of manner. My father, 6 feet 3, did not lift the top of his head above the waistline of these people. Each one seemed to vie with the others in extending courtesies and showing kindness to us. They were richly attired, men in handsome tunics of silk and satin, belted at the waist. They wore knee breeches and stockings of a fine texture, and encased in sandals adorned with gold buckles.
Their feet.
Neither my father nor myself felt the least bit of solicitude for our safety. Father said, "This is the fulfillment of the tradition told me by my father and my father's father, and still back for many generations of our race. This is assuredly the land beyond the north wind."
We were given, Olaf wrote, to the charge of Jules Galdea and his wife to learn their language, and which turns out to be very much like Sanskrit. This big vessel, the pleasure cruiser, retraced its course upriver. Its machinery was noiseless and very powerful. Trees and banks on either side rushed by, and the ship's speed was faster than any railroad train that Olaf had ever seen, even here in America, he says. Olaf says, "We lost sight of the sun's rays, but the dull red sun gave out an even whiter light. It was brighter than 2 full moons. In 12 hours, the whiteness passed out of sight, and then there was 12 hours of night." This ship, the pleasure ship, was equipped with electricity. It had soft lights. In 1829, we had the outside surface, didn't even know about electricity yet. Okay, so now we come to the town of Jehu, which means port. After 2 days, the Naz, that's the pleasure boat, stopped at the city of Jehu. Jehu featured big, well-made houses. On the hillsides, there were vineyards. In the valleys, there was grain. And the Jensens noticed there was gold everywhere. Door casings were inlaid. Tables were covered with gold. The domes of the public buildings were gold. They had gold, lots of it, in the great temples of music that they had. Vegetation grew in exuberance all over Agartha, this inner earth. Fruits of all kinds, according to Olaf, possessed the most delicate flavor. He says clusters of grapes were 4 or 5 feet in length. Each grape was as large as an orange. He said there was apples larger than a man's head. There were huge herds of cattle that he could see all along the banks.
Olaf wrote that after he and his dad learned to speak the language, much like the Sanskrit of this people, an envoy from the ruler at Eden came to see us. For 2 days my father and I were put through questions: from whence we came, what sort of people dwelt without, what god we worshipped, our religious beliefs, the modes of living in our strange land. The compass which we had brought with us attracted attention. The compass still pointed north, although we had sailed over the edge of the earth's aperture and were far south on the inside surface of the earth's crust, 300 miles in thickness from the inside to the outside surface. The luminous cloud or ball of dull red fire, fiery red in the mornings and evenings, and daytime beautiful white light, is called the smoky god. This sun seemed suspended in the center of the earth, held to its place by power that draws or repels with equal force in all directions. The base of this sun is dark and non-transparent, save for small openings in the bottom of the altar of the deity. Lights through these openings twinkle at night and seem to be stars, except larger. The smoky god, which with each daily revolution of the sun appears to come up in the east and go down in the west. The people believe the smoky god is stationary and that night and day is produced by the earth's daily rotation.
Olaf wrote that his father drew maps of the outside surface for the envoy from Eden who was interviewing him. And the maps showed the divisions of land and water, the names of the continents, large islands, and oceans. And he gave this to the envoy of Eden. And so then they get to go to Eden. Olaf writes, "We were taken overland to the city of Eden in an electrical conveyance that ran on a single iron rail at high speed up hills, down dales, and across valleys and along mountains. The car seats were huge, high above the floor of the car. On top of each car, there was a geared flywheel, and these flywheels were on their side, and they adjusted the speed as the speed of the car increased. Jules Galdea, the guide, said that these revolving wheels on top of the train destroyed the atmospheric pressure against the train so that the car wouldn't fall to one side. We learned," says Olaf, "that the males don't marry until they're 75 to 100 years old. And men and women down here frequently live 600 to 800 years. Olaf says we are brought before the high priest. This great high priest was the ruler of all Agartha. Our craft," says Olaf, "was brought before him too." So it wasn't just Olaf and his dad. They got their ship there too. The high priest was richly robed, way taller than everybody around him. He was, Olaf says, maybe 15 feet in height. This immense room in which he received us, Olaf says, was furnished with solid slabs of gold all around, and they were studded with jewels. This city, Eden, is located in a beautiful valley on the loftiest mountain. Here, fruits, vines, shrubs, trees, and flowers grow, and the 4 rivers, named like those on earth, on top, but the 4 rivers inside are called the Euphrates, the Pison, the Gihon, and the Hiddekel. They have their sources in a mighty artesian fountain. They divide and they flow in 4 directions. Olaf says we were given an audience for 2 hours with this high priest, and he seemed kind and considerate. He asked us lots of questions, questions about things that his emissary hadn't asked us.
The high priest asked the Jensens whether they wished to remain in his country or return to the outer world. Olaf reveals that his father replied, "It would please me, my son, to visit your country and see your people, your colleges and palaces of music and art, your great fields, your wonderful forest of timber, and after we have had this pleasurable privilege, we would like to try to return to our home on the outside surface of the earth. This son is my only child, and my good wife will be weary awaiting our return." "You will find it difficult to return," replied the priest. "Visit the different countries with Galdea as your escort. Then, when ready to return outside, your boat shall be put in the river Hiddekel's mouth, and we will bid you, Jehovah, speed." We visited villages, towns, and the cities of Niji, Delphi, and Hectea. Father was called upon a half-dozen times to go over the maps he gave of the outside world. Delphi. We came to a forest of gigantic trees near the city of Delphi. The people there are exceedingly musical and learned in arts and sciences, especially geometry and astronomy. In cities, the underworlders built palaces of music where 25,000 voices of this giant race swelled forth in mighty choruses. Inner-world children don't go to school until they reach 20 years old. Then their school life begins and continues for 30 years, 10 of which are devoted by both sexes to the study of music. The Jansen saw the inner earth industries, architecture, agriculture, and horticulture. Inner earthers raised huge cattle herds and built travel vehicles.
3/4 of the inner surface of Earth, according to Jansen, is land, and 1/4 is water. Olaf cites huge rivers as wide as 30 miles that run from the inner world to the outer world. The waters of the inner world come out to the outer and they freeze, and then they're pushed out to sea like huge tongues of ice. And so they make these freshets of turbulent water bursting out about twice a year, and they sweep everything before them. And it's fresh water. Prolific bird life, including birds with 30-foot wingspans, greeted the Jensens from the seashore to the mountains everywhere they went. Olaf said that Galdea, their guide, took them to an inlet where they saw thousands of tortoises along the sandy shore. The tortoises were 25 to 30 feet in length and 15 to 20 feet in width, and fully 7 feet in height. Wow. One day, says Olaf, we saw a great herd of elephants. They must have been 500 of these. They were tearing huge boughs from the trees and trampling the smaller growth into dust. They averaged, these elephants, over 100 feet in length and 75 to 85 feet in height, way bigger than the elephants we know. A hazy myth, says Olaf, goes up from the land every evening. It rains once every 24 hours. In places, the level valleys stretched out for many miles in every direction. And the smoky god, in its clear white light, looked calmly down.
Remember, I'm reading excerpts from Olaf Jansen's notes that he gave Willis Erickson. So here we go. We spent more than a year visiting cities of the within world and intervening country, and more than 2 years from the time we picked up on the river. They told the high priest they wanted to return to the surface world. Our host, Olaf says, gave Father maps showing the inside surface of the earth, its cities, oceans, seas, rivers, gulfs, and bays. They offered us bags of gold. We returned to Jehu and spent a month overhauling our sloop. The ship Naz that originally discovered us took us on board and sailed to the mouth of the river Hiddekel. The winds blew from the northern opening of the earth towards what Olaf sense of south, but which by the Jansen's compass was directly north. Olaf's father said to return by the same route as we came in is impossible now. The only thing we can do is go south. He turned the craft about and started, ignoring the compass, what he felt was really due south. In 40 days, Olaf said, we arrived at Delphi, a city near the mouth of the Gihon River. Here we stopped for 2 days, entertained by the same people who welcomed us on our former visit. We laid in provisions and set sail for the south they sensed.
On our outward trip, Olaf related, we came through a narrow channel separating the water between two considerable bodies of land. We waited ashore to rest up for a day before continuing the outward journey. There was a mild, luminous light from the outer sun shining in from the south aperture of the earth. As they moved on, the atmosphere grew colder. Winds filled our sails, Olaf says, from the warm climate within the earth. There were warm winds coming out. And their compass behaved in the same drunken fashion over the southern curve of the earth as it had on their inbound trip on the northern entrance. Then an iceberg hit the Jansen boat. Olaf's father, Jen, drowned. A whaling ship, was called the Arlington, picked Olaf up. When Olaf recovered, the Arlington's captain, a guy named Angus MacPherson, said, "Where'd you come from? How come you're alone on the iceberg in the Antarctic Ocean?" Olaf said, "I replied that I came from inside the earth, and I told him how Father and I had gone in by way of Spitsbergen in the north and came out by way of the South Pole." Well, MacPherson threw Olaf in irons. Olaf wrote, "I heard the captain say I was crazy and must remain in confinement until I was rational enough to give a truthful account of myself. I decided to invent some story that would satisfy the captain and never again refer to my trip. So Olaf paid the captain off and went to Stockholm. But there, as we related, he found his mother had died and a relative got him committed to a mental institution for 28 years.
I'd like to talk a little bit about this, if you would. We're getting more and more whistleblowers and people that are saying that they're is Inner Earth Civilization, Agartha. We have Admiral Byrd's account in the, what was that, 1940 something?
1947.
47.
He also went to the North Pole many years before that.
Right. And so we're interested in stories of the Inner Earth Civilization, people who have been researching it and writing books or have stories. So please do contact us at aquarianradio@gmail.com, aquarianradio@gmail.com. Anything else you want to say?
We have more than just this story. Go to enkispeaks.com, www.enkispeaks.com. We have all these YouTubes about Agartha, the Inner Earth, the evidence for the Battle of the Weddell Sea, where Byrd was defeated by the Nazis with their anti-grav craft, or else by their allies in New Schwabenland under the Antarctic. We have several accounts of the Bodlanders and the German moles who came in through Brazil and worked their way through many centuries to Bodland in the Antarctic. So do look at our Enki Speaks and look at the different postings we have on Agartha, Inner Earth.
And this has been part 2 in our series, Inner Earth Civilization. And today's episode was Olaf Jansen's adventure in Agartha. And you can get more on Agartha at enkispeaks.com. And we have an entire archive of many of our radio shows at aquarianradio.com. Thank you, listeners, for joining us, and we will see you again very soon.
Thanks for joining us today on Aquarian Radio. We broadcast daily, and our schedule is on aquarianradio.com. Listen live by calling 646-649-0893, or you can listen live by calling 646-649-0893, or listen to our archives on aquarianradio.com. Join us again soon, and do tell your friends. The age of Aquarius and the paradigm of peace is now.